Hello everyone, this is Evie Lupine. Welcome back to my channel, and today I have another video for you all. Today we are going to be discussing if you can have a daddy-girl relationship without it being a BDSM relationship. Now, I do have a lot of other videos where I have discussed at length what DDLG is, what CGL is, what age play is, what the differences between all of these things are, how you can get started in DDLG, all of that. So if you want to watch those videos or are looking for more information on what exactly DDLG is, I do recommend you check those out. I will link some of them down in the description box so you have a reference point to start with, because I am not necessarily going to be completely explaining everything that DDLG or CGL is. And on that note, specifically with this video, I am going to be talking about daddy-girl relationships and DDLG relationships. Feel free to substitute in here as necessary the terminology that you prefer or your particular permutation of a CGL-based relationship. So if you are somebody who identifies as a mommy, as an agender little, as a little boy, so on and so forth, feel free to substitute that language in this video if you so choose. However, I think as we get into the meat of this video, you may realize that some of what I'm going to say really does apply more to the specifics of the types of relationships that form between daddies and girls, rather than necessarily different complexities that may occur with a mommy and little boy or a mommy and little girl type relationship, just because of the nature of the archetypes of those relationships that so many of us borrow from when we are constructing these relationships. And I know I said I'm not going to get too into it in this video, but I do like to start out my videos generally with just a little bit of definitional work, because I think it's important to make sure that we are all on the same page and working with the same understanding when we get into topics like these. So for me, I define DDLG as a subset of CGL, that is caregiver and little, which is a style of BDSM relationship where there is a daddy dom and a little girl who participate in a mutually negotiated, mutually consented to BDSM focused relationship. There are a lot of other variations on CGL, like I mentioned, that are not just DDLG. For example, there are relationships that involve the little being the D type. There are relationships where the daddy is the submissive, where the dominant is actually a mommy or an auntie or an uncle. So there's a lot of other terms and different ways that this type of relationship can form, but by far the most common is DDLG. Now, what I want to discuss in this video again is, can you have a daddy and girl relationship without it necessarily being BDSM? And I think that's a really interesting question, because there are a lot of people who are maybe interested in this style of relationship but are otherwise vanilla, or maybe don't really understand what it is to be involved in BDSM. I am here to discuss why that may not be the case. What really opened my eyes about this subject was actually a book I was reading by Master M. Hatter, and I'm actually going to pull it out now so I can give you guys a quote from it while we were going over this subject. So the book is In the Flesh, The Dominant's Guide to Making BDSM Work, which is again by Master M. Hatter. It's available on Amazon if you are interested in reading it. The book itself does not focus on DDLG. It is not exclusive to age play or to CGL relationships. It's very much an overview of a lot of different aspects of BDSM and the role that a dominant would play in those particular aspects. He has several other books as well. In particular, he has a book on submissives called Learning to Kneel, and it's definitely an evolution of this book. This book came first, but he does devote a chapter to specifically talking about daddy and girl type relationships, and throughout it he goes through different types of girls, different types of daddies, different types of power exchange that you can have in these relationships. And I think if you're somebody who is interested in learning more about CGL and about the power exchange elements of that, I would definitely recommend this book, because it is coming from the perspective of somebody who is a daddy, in addition to a lot of other things that he does in his BDSM relationships. And what I would like to read to you today is from this particular passage called No One True Way. And he says, and there are daddies who don't know what DS is, what BDSM is, or even what they are supposed to be doing in this dynamic. I discovered this when a sheetrock repairman and his wife were working on my house, and she called him daddy because he was 10 years older than her. I started observing their interactions more closely, and they were indeed very DG, but when asked about it, he had no idea that there was even such a thing as DG to begin with. If a man enjoys the rewards of being older or pretending to be older than his woman, and the woman gets affirmation, protection, and nurturing from the relationship, they can be said to be in a daddy-girl dynamic, and they may not even know it. And I think for me, being somebody who is not of the DDLG community, being somebody who is not in that relationship style, I had never really considered that there might be people who are participating in what we in the BDSM community would perceive as being DDLG, but they may not even know it. And I think it's worthwhile to first break down why that would happen, because I think being in the BDSM community, we can get very defensive over our terminology, and we want to be protective of our community, make sure that people who are doing this are having full knowledge of what good consent looks like and negotiation and all that stuff. But there are people who can find themselves in what we would classify as DDLG or DG relationships, and they really, really would not even know it. And I think it's because a lot of the aspects that we as BDSM people find appealing about those relationship styles are also things that vanilla people who otherwise do not have any interest in BDSM would also find appealing as well. Because the core part of what most people find appealing about DDLG, I've discovered, is the elements around being protected, being nurtured, being guided, being mentored. And on the D side of it, the ability to nurture somebody, the ability to watch somebody grow and become their best selves, the ability to take care of something and protect something. And being in vanilla society does not necessarily make you immune to having those kinds of desires or just finding yourselves in relationships that have those aspects to them, because a desire to be protected and to protect others in turn is something that in vanilla society and vanilla culture, especially in heterosexual male-female relationships, a lot of people still have a very deep value for, both in terms of being a daddy, being a caretaker and provider is a very, very typical valued masculine trait, and being somebody who needs to be protected, somebody who needs somebody to guide them and mentor them is something that is valued in a lot of females when they are, again, in heterosexual relationships. This is not to say that everybody's relationship is this way, and I'm not trying to disparage vanilla culture in any sense, but it is something that I think a lot of us either consciously or subconsciously are drawn to because it's just part of the values that the larger dominant culture shares. So what ends up happening is people naturally end up going into these relationships where there is this maybe unconscious difference in power, let's say, where maybe there is an age gap, an experience gap, maybe one of them is farther along in their career than another, or there's a maturity difference, or any of a number of other things that for some reason would put the one who we would call being in the daddy role sort of higher up in the power hierarchy of this relationship, and the one that we would call the girl is lower on the power relationship. Now, this can also definitely occur when everybody is completely equal across the board, but oftentimes there is some starting differential in power that occurs that makes this DG resemblance so much stronger. And the term daddy is by no means exclusive to BDSM. BDSM did not coin the term daddy. We did not coin the term little. Now, there are a lot of other aspects in ways that those terms get combined and used together that I think very, very strongly indicate a knowledge or a desire to be part of BDSM and to want to have that particular style of relationship, but that doesn't necessarily always mean that everybody who calls their partner daddy is somebody who's in a DDLG relationship, because it was actually, at least in America, this book is actually written by a British author, so I'm not sure what the history is in the UK, but in America it was actually very common all the way up until the 60s to call your partner daddy. It was just a thing that happened. It was a term of endearment. And again, because the men in these traditional heterosexual relationships are supposed to be the caretakers and the providers, who does that for a girl when she's growing up? Her daddy. And then that power gets transitioned to the husband when they get married. And it's very stereotypical and it's very heteronormative and very vanilla culture, but it does happen. And that's really the point of this is that you can have a daddy-girl relationship without even knowing what BDSM is. And again, it goes back to that initial power disparity just naturally occurring in the relationship, or one partner just naturally being the more dominant personality, or being the personality who wants to please more, or the personality who needs more guidance, or the personality who really wants to help others achieve and grow. All of these things occur naturally. Like, it wasn't like there was long, long ago and far, far away, there was BDSM. And from BDSM, one day, after a great lightning storm struck a forest, a single tree produced a diamond, and that diamond became CGL. Like, it wasn't like CGL just came out of nowhere, out of some, like, mythical event that happened in the history of BDSM. DDLG happened over time and developed into a formalized part of BDSM because there were already people existing who had these relationship styles, who didn't have a name for it and wanted to take it to a next level. But those original relationship styles, where DDLG came from and became formalized as part of BDSM, didn't go away. There is still very much unspoken relationship trends and unspoken relationship dynamics that happen constantly, all the time, that sometimes have been formalized into BDSM and sometimes have just remained as they are in unspoken vanilla relationships where there is not conscious power exchange, there's not any conscious BDSM activity, there is just that natural power differential that happens. Which leads me on to my next point, which is, where is the line between when it's BDSM and when it's not BDSM? And I know in particular, people, again, they get frustrated, they get concerned or defensive or protective of BDSM and the terminology that we use in BDSM. And I think that's very understandable, especially with the internet having so widely disseminated knowledge of DDLG over the years. There have been many subsets, many individual people who have tried to remove DDLG from a BDSM context and tried to make it something that it's not. But I think there's a difference in this situation, because in the first example, that's somebody who consciously knows about DDLG and BDSM and is choosing to take that terminology purposely for their own uses. Whereas in this case, this is somebody who has naturally stumbled upon a relationship style that they like and that works for them without any knowledge or BDSM related desires at all. It's something that occurs organically as a result of these people with these individual energies that mesh in this one particular way happening. So I don't necessarily think that people having daddy-girl relationships or mommy-boy relationships, or what we would coin as being those things, without calling it DDLG, like, I don't think that's something to necessarily be offended over or concerned about. Because another thing that's really key about being in BDSM is that it's a conscious choice. BDSM is a conscious decision. You have to choose to be in BDSM. BDSM is not something that you get randomly dropped off on your doorstep, like a stork dropping off a baby. It's something that you have to consciously negotiate, that you have to consciously consent to. It's not something that you suddenly are or aren't based on your personal activities. It's something that you choose to be a part of. And that's something that's also really important to remember with people who may be in daddy-girl dynamics but aren't necessarily part of the BDSM community or don't know what BDSM is. Those things can exist naturally. They don't have to necessarily be part of BDSM. Can these relationships feature things that we may consider BDSM? Does the dialogue resemble something that may occur in a BDSM relationship? Are there differentials in power that may be like those that exist in BDSM dynamics? Sure, but again, participating in BDSM is a conscious decision and a conscious choice. What I will highlight here, however, is because these daddy-girl relationships are ones that occur usually organically and naturally without knowing what BDSM is, they are less risky typically than your usual DDLG, BDSM-based relationship. And just hear me out on that one. And the reason for that is that these are typically vanilla relationships where people are sort of constantly like adjusting and readjusting the aspects of the relationship. There's not a contract. There is not any sort of negotiated list of rules. There's not punishments. There is not scenes that happen. There's not impact play. There's no like mindfuckery or orgasm torture or orgasm control or like any of the things that would normally happen that would cause us in the BDSM community concern if people were not consciously consenting to or consciously negotiating. Those things don't happen in just somebody who has organically like found DG relationship styles in their everyday life, because the most that kind of happens is this very subtle, usually natural level of power exchange, which is kind of constantly being adjusted and readjusted within the context of it being a normal relationship. So there's already kind of their own protocol that they follow in terms of how relationship disputes are handled, or when problems arise, or when there's conflicts or something emotional happens. Those are all handled in their own way that does not resemble BDSM, because again, there's not rules or contracts or punishments or any of those kinds of things that you need to be really careful to negotiate for, because this is something that happens just on its own. And I think something that is really interesting for people who want to see like a real life example of a couple who has actually sort of discovered that they are in a DG relationship without ever realizing it. I will link to their video down below, but a couple weeks ago I came across a series of videos from a YouTube channel that has absolutely nothing to do with sexuality or BDSM or education anyway. It was just like a fun little channel, and they got so many comments from people who were seeing this couple's relationship and the way that they acted with each other in blogs, and were like, have you ever heard of DDLG before? Are you guys in a DDLG relationship? And they had no idea what it was. And it just opened up a whole world of possibilities for them about whether or not they wanted to like actually pursue the BDSM aspects that were just naturally part of their personalities and the way that they happen to be in romantic relationships. And so I would watch that, because I think it gives a lot of perspective to this conversation and why it's important to not try and necessarily hold vanilla people who are not doing BDSM to BDSM standards, because the risk level is different and the motivation is different, and just there are differences, I guess is what I'm saying. So to summarize everything that I've gone over in this video, and the point I'm trying to make here is that you can have a relationship that resembles that between a daddy and a girl that does not occur as part of BDSM, because DG, having a daddy and a girl type of dynamic in your relationship, is something that can naturally occur just because of the values that we place on masculinity and femininity, and the values that we have for male and female romantic partners naturally lend themselves in some people to take the form of that between a daddy and a girl. Terminology like daddy or baby girl was not coined from BDSM. It's not something that's exclusive to BDSM, and people have historically used those terms in vanilla romantic relationships for literally decades. That's all I wanted to talk about in this video. Hopefully you guys found this video interesting and helpful. I always love the opportunity to get to talk more about subjects like DDLG and pet play, because I know so many of you are in those relationship styles and want to know more about them, and not just superficial stuff, talking about this kind of weird philosophical, like, what really is DDLG? How do we define it differently from that in vanilla culture type stuff? So if you guys like this video, do give it a thumbs up. If you haven't already and you want to see more content from me, please do subscribe. I make videos twice a week. And if you guys really like this video and you want to see more content from me, do check out my Patreon. That is the best way to contact me if you have questions, if you want to get into an in-depth discussion, if you want to see more videos and be part of our awesome Discord group chat. That is the best way to do it. So do check that out. Link will be down below and over here after the end screen somewhere. So again, check it out if you want to. And thank you so much if you do already support my channel. It means the world to me. Thank you guys so much. And until I see you again, I hope you have a great rest of your day and a great rest of your week. Bye-bye.